the more we know about our matrescence process, that transition to motherhood, the more empowered we are to recognize when we are within the normal but clunky pieces of transition, and when we maybe are stepping out of that normal but clunky and need a little bit more support.
Hello and welcome to the Empowered Woman podcast. This week, I'm joined by psychologist and perinatal specialist Rebecca Reddin. In this conversation, we talk about matrescence from a perinatal mental health perspective, the hard parts of motherhood, and what to do when you feel like something just isn't right with your mental health after becoming a mother. Hi, Rebecca. Thank you for joining me on the Empowered Woman. I'd like to start off. So explain to me what matrescence is. When does it start? When does it end? And what happens a woman in this transition?
Absolutely. There is so many layers to that question. And so I'm so delighted we are here and talking about it, mostly because the more we know about our matrescence process, that transition to motherhood, the more empowered we are to recognize when we are within the normal but clunky pieces of transition, and when we maybe are stepping out of that normal but clunky and need a little bit more support. So, to answer your question, matrescence is that transition to motherhood. When does it start? Is a bit of a hot topic. So,
Mhm.
there typically has been a recognition that matrescence starts when with conception. That once we are pregnant, once we get that positive pregnancy test, oh, there we go. We're starting on this journey to become mother. I would like to argue two sides of that timeline. One, I do think that that process for many individuals starts earlier than that positive.
Mhm.
I think about all of those who are running the marathon of fertility challenges, and they're dreaming and preparing and readying themselves for that positive pregnancy test. Absolutely is part of their matrescence process. They're already on the journey in that. And I think it's
Yeah.
really hard and painful to not be included in this club of those on the journey to motherhood when we exclude them. So for me, I always include the kind of fertility journey in part of our matrescence process. The end of it, typically we tend to see that the kind of owning the name of mom tends to happen around that 1 year mark. Many of us expect, oh, as soon as baby is born and is in arms, I will feel like a mother. But so many moms don't have that experience. Their idea of mother is their own mother. They don't really know what kind of mom they are. There's still a lot of shifts and identity development that happen, plus a whole heck of a lot of hormones that are going on at that point. So we tend to say that matrescence is kind of finishing around year 1 to 2, depending on hormonal shifts, identity shifts. But I want to push on that
Yeah.
because what happens when we become a mom of two or three? What happens when we, are still figuring out what is it like to be a working mother? What is it like to be a mom of a teenager? I mean, I just think that our matrescence process is this ongoing journey throughout
Mhm.
our life rather than something that has a definite end.
And just talk to me. So, women who, and you mentioned the really important part about the, difficult fertility journeys. What about women who adopt a child or have a child via surrogacy, or women who are on a long fertility journey and they don't have a baby at the end of it, or women who can't have a baby but would like to have a baby? Where
Mhm.
does matrescence, where does that fit for them?
And I want to acknowledge that these are the groups that we often leave out of the conversation of matrescence. So I'm so glad that you're bringing them up because, uh, I mean, I see more and more for Mother's Day as we see
Yeah.
kind of the Instagram posts. There's the acknowledgement of all of the different types of mothers, all of those who are in different places in their journey to motherhood. And we look at, even looking at kind of to think about adoption or surrogacy, moms who kind of bring kiddos into their life in these ways, who grow their families in these ways, still go through physical changes,
Hmm.
identity changes, relationship changes. To step back just briefly to give some context to this. So, when we're looking at the official diagnosis or the official definition of matrescence, matrescence is that transition to parenthood, but it is encompassing of a couple of specific layers of change that we experience. So, we experience physical change. We think about, growing a person in our bodies. We also think about the hormonal pieces. We think about the identity change, shifting from being a child to having a child. We
Hmm.
think about the relationship changes, the relationship with ourselves, but also with our partner. Ooh, we're going from, you know, partners to parents. There's a huge, huge change that happens there. What about the relationship with our own parents? Now they're
Hmm.
grandparents. We're navigating so many layers in that process. So if matrescence is kind of inclusive of all of these stages, all of these pieces of change, we can look at each of these different groups of, maybe they call themselves mothers, maybe they don't call themselves mothers. It's a really unique choice there, but adoptive or surrogacy moms, they actually still go through a physical change. We see huge hormonal changes for moms, for adoptive and surrogacy moms
Mm.
through surrogacy. Um, they see a lot of the same postpartum shifts
Yeah.
that we see in birthing moms. That's what one of the reasons why adoptive moms actually have a very similar risk of developing perinatal mood and anxiety disorders is in part because of some of those hormonal changes their body feels. They're absolutely going through the identity shifts, the challenges of how do I be a mom? They've got actually an extra layer of like, oh, I'm navigating. Maybe I don't have a genetic link to this child. Maybe I didn't birth this child from my body. Ooh, what are the layers of figuring out what motherhood in that looks like? If we're looking at moms who are navigating that fertility journey, ooh, there's a lot of hormones involved in the
Mm.
fertility. And we are riding these huge hormonal waves that simulate the early pregnancy piece. We are every time we're waiting for that positive pregnancy test. We dream and imagine that pregnancy, that due date,
Yeah.
that child. We're doing the mental math. We know exactly when that child is due, when that child's going to go to preschool, when that, we've already, gotten all the way to weddings with that child. That's just what we do. To deny that being part of a matrescence process seems really unfair. And
Mm.
actually, when we're talking about the grief that comes with fertility pieces, a lot of it is grieving that child, that
Yeah.
potential timeline, rather than just grieving you're not pregnant. It's so much more complex than that.
So let's, I suppose, dive into what happens during
Ugh.
matrescence.
Yes, there are so many pieces. Let's start with some of the hormonal pieces, just because
Hmm.
it's really fascinating to see kind of what's physiologically happening in our bodies when we are navigating this transition to parenthood. It starts from the very beginning. Once we have that implantation, once we can get that positive pregnancy test, we've got a huge burst of progesterone. Progesterone is our implantation hormone. It's really important, but it's also the one that makes us feel kind of crabby before our period comes. So we tend to not feel great in those first couple of weeks. We can actually see things like more anxiety, maybe fatigue. We don't feel like ourselves until the estrogen starts to boost up throughout pregnancy. We also have this, really lovely nausea that often shows up during that time. That's actually often hormonally driven. The same hormone that gives us the positive pregnancy test is the same hormone that can make us feel really, really quite ill in the beginning of it. Um, we might then have, in our second trimester, we might feel a little bit more calibrated, a little bit more like ourselves, as we have growing estrogen, but not always. But as we get to the end of that, we actually see, ooh, the estrogen really starts to pump up. We start to make progesterone again. We are noticing those physical changes in our body. We might start to feel really uncomfortable. Our body is preparing for labor and delivery. We have an onslaught of increased hormones. The impact of this is we might start to, well, some of the ones that you probably know, we might start nesting. We might start preparing for baby. We feel like we want to make space for that. We see that we do something called maternal preoccupation, which is we start turning in towards our baby. We start paying attention. We start preparing ourselves. We start maybe imagining what birth is going to be like. We start imagining what it's going to be like to have this little person. We might get really scared at this point. Oh my goodness, it's actually happening. How am I
Mhm.
going to do this? We might get into planning mode or preparation mode. We try to prepare. All of this is really, really driven by some of the physical shifts that are happening in our body. Once we've brought that baby into the world, maybe, whether it's through a vaginal delivery or whether it's through a C-section, doesn't matter. Actually, when the placenta detaches, we experience what's called the hormonal crash.
Mhm.
This is, we go from having the most estrogen we will ever have in our bodies, in our lives, to basically nothing. It is huge and turbulent. We then have an increase, whether or not we choose to breastfeed, in our kind of breastfeeding hormones. So there's this just onslaught of them, so many hormones happening. We also have this little person we're trying to care for, and maybe we're not sleeping. We're trying to figure out how to feed this little person. We are, trying to figure out what we're doing and probably feeling really incompetent. Our confidence totally drops because we've never done this before, especially if this is our first child.
Mhm.
We may have cared for other children, but we've never cared for this child before. So a really natural thing that happens is we feel really inconfident, not confident. We feel incompetent in that. It's not actually that we don't know what we're doing. It
Yeah.
would be great if it was, we birthed a baby, we birthed the placenta, and then we birthed a manual that tells us how to care for that baby. That would be fantastic. But that's not the case. So we're
Yeah.
figuring it out. The baby's figuring it out. And it takes about 2 weeks for our hormones to just get back to like a bare minimum basic stability, which is that baby blues, which is that like, oh, I'm crying at a dog food commercial and I'm questioning why did I become a mom at all? And then I'm just like so in love with my baby. After that, we're still experiencing hormonal changes. If we're breastfeeding, um, if we're not, we're still, our bodies take a year to 2 years to fully recalibrate hormonally.
Mhm.
And during that time, the learning curve is steep. We're also often doing that with an audience. We have
Yeah.
our family, our partner, our in laws, everyone telling us, you should do this, you shouldn't do that. Why are you doing it that way? When we are just trying to figure out what works for this little tiny human that we brought into the world.
Mm. And so, what are some of the most common experiences you would see in new mothers around matrescence that we don't talk about enough?
Oh, and I'm really glad that you've asked us because the more we know about this, actually, the better we can discern between that. Ooh, is this the clunky but normal of matrescence, or
Mhm.
is this the I need to reach out and get some more support, which I'm a big believer. If at any point it's feeling clunky and hard, reach out for that support. You don't need to meet a certain threshold. You don't need to meet a kind of level on the scale. You can always reach out for support. And
Yeah.
I talk to moms about matrescence all the time. All the time. Sometimes it's, 1 to 3 conversations. Sometimes it's longer than that, depending, but there's so many pieces. Let's name them out. So family stuff comes up a lot. You know, as we become mothers, as we go through this identity shift of, ooh, suddenly I'm going to be mom. We start to think about our own baby. We start to think about the type of mom we want to be. We think about what we want to provide for this baby that maybe, just maybe, we didn't get or that we wanted when we were children. And we start to understandably reflect back on our own childhood, on our relationship with our parents. And it's incredibly common to have a wide variety of experiences. Some individuals, some moms are, oh my goodness, I have so much gratitude for what my mom did for me, or I now understand how hard this was, or I had no idea the amount of love my mom has for me or my dad has for me because now I've experienced that firsthand. Sometimes it's not as positive of an experience.
Hmm.
Sometimes there's a recognition of, ooh, I would I would do anything for this baby. How could my own parents not have done this for me or shown up for me in this way? And there might be a bit of a grieving process as we navigate our relationship with our own parents. One of the things we so need in matrescence is something we call mothering the mother. Mothering the mother is that holding of the mom so that the mom can hold the baby.
Yeah.
Somebody has to be holding mom. This is the community, this is the village that we so often hear about, but most of us yearn to have our mothers be the one that holds us. And sometimes our mother is the one that holds us, and sometimes they're not. So there can be a huge amount of grief in that. Maybe it's around expectations. Ooh, I wish my parents had, I wish they were more involved with the baby. Why don't they want to spend more time? There's a lot that comes up there. So I would say that's a really big common area that I see with my clients who are coming in. Another huge one is feeding. Like, one of our biggest goals as a mom is to care for our baby. As we go through the matrescence process, we, we become very understandably, value aligned with making sure that this little person thrives. Like, we want everything. We will find the sun, moon, and stars for this little person. What can we do when they're super small? We can keep them safe and we can feed them,
Hmm.
right? When feeding, whether that's breastfeeding or bottle feeding, is clunky, the like the stress, the strain, the pain that that brings is visceral. I can't do this thing. And we don't talk about enough that breastfeeding is hard, but bottle feeding can also be really hard. Oftentimes there's this idea of like, oh, it's easy if you bottle feed, but for a lot of moms, that's just not the case. Anytime feeding is getting hard, we get those feelings of failure. I'm not good at this. I'm not doing a good job. I can't even feed my baby. Am I doing this right? That incompetence, that lack of confidence shows up. And because it's the thing that we quote unquote are supposed to be able to do for our babies, it can be really, really painful. I think this ties in with another really common one that I hear all the time, which is was I meant to be a mom? Am I good at this? How can I be a good mom? In the world that we live in, there's a lot of influence on that. We open up our social media, and right there is a million different people telling us what good motherhood looks like. And we, we might have some really contradicting messages. One person is saying, okay, by being a good mother, you have to, you know, really hold boundaries and be clear and be consistent. And then another is saying you have to be like understanding and empathetic and lean in and be flexible. And what does that mean? How do I, in this situation, be a good mom? What I do a lot with the women that I work with is we actually write out a job description for motherhood. We, just like we've had job descriptions in our life, in our professional life, we've had these very clear objectives. Okay, I know when I'm doing a good job. I know when I'm meeting the job description. I know when I'm showing up. I also know what's not my responsibility or what's not important, what I can deprioritize. We as a society today don't have a very clear job description for moms. We're kind of just supposed to do everything with a smile on our face and never complain about it. The reality is that we need to make our own job description. We need to be clear about what good motherhood means for us. And that might take a while to figure out. Again, I like to shoot for that 1 year mark. Like at 1 year, we should have a generally good idea of like, okay, I feel like a good mom when I leave the dishes in the sink and I spend time with my kiddos. When we get outside every day. When I balance taking care of me and taking care of my kiddos, whatever that is. We have to know, and it has to be realistic because we can set the
Yeah.
pie in the sky expectations very easily.
That's the thing. And I think you've touched on it there that many women, um, we expect motherhood to feel instinctive, yet we're surprised at how disorienting it can be. Why do you think that gap exists?
Not only is that something that we hear maybe from other moms, from the people within our circle who are willing to recognize, like it's
Mm.
actually really well supported by the research. The research shows this huge discrepancy between like moms describe so much joy and love and dedication, real positive pieces in their role as mom. But then they also describe this like feeling of lost, feeling of overwhelm, feeling of stress. My experience has really come down to we aren't one setting a realistic expectation for motherhood. We're not supporting moms in the way that they need to, and we're not talking to women about the realities of motherhood. So to go through these, one, the expectations on mothers. We think we've moved past that kind of 1950s, housewife smile, always happy. Oh, it's so persistent. That
Mhm.
expectation, no matter how many hours you work, no matter how much other things you're juggling, no matter whether you're a stay-at-home mom, a working mom, whether you're on maternity leave, whether you've got a 5-year-old, we just expect moms to be self-sacrificial. Doesn't matter about your own needs. Just take care of your kids. That's your job. That's your role. And we can't pour from an empty cup. I mean, if we aren't putting anything in, we're going to find that it's going to be hard to keep pouring out. I talk
Mhm.
about all the time that if my resource bucket is really, really full, it's like spilling over because I'm so well resourced. And somebody asks me for something, I'm going to be in such a give mentality. Like, yes, please let me give that to you. Because I'm abundant, I'm resourced. But if I'm scraping the bottom of the barrel and somebody asks me for something, even if it's my newborn crying because they're hungry, even if it's my,
Yeah.
my partner asking for a hug, even if it's work asking for that deadline, it's going to feel like a take, even if it's value aligned, even if it's something that I want to give. If I'm low on energy and resources, it's going to feel like they are taking that last little bit that I have. And this doesn't mean we're bad mothers or we don't want to give to our children. It means our resources are low. And so the self-sacrificing narrative combined with the lack of support and community leaves a lot of moms in this place where they just don't have anything else to give. They're
Mhm.
angry, they're snappy, they're patient and impatient, and they feel like they're failing when
Yeah.
really they're just not supported. And this is one of my big bugbears is we hear build your community, find your village. And then we bring baby home and we're like, okay, when does the village arrive? When can I order it? Do I have to call someone? Unfortunately, there's no natural village for a lot of moms. Many of us live further away from our families than we have before. But we might
Mm.
not have that like in the village, by location kind of community. And so we are today often piecing together our community, our village of friends, moms from the breastfeeding group, that woman I met on the Facebook group, that my neighbor who also is pushing the buggy around the neighborhood, my lactation consultant or a doula. We're piecing this together while we're sleep deprived, while we're overwhelmed, while we're trying to do all of
Yeah.
this. We were never meant to do this alone. If you look back on human history, we lived in small communities. We were surrounded by people who had, were in the matrescence journey, who were just out of it, who had been through it, who could help us, support us. Babies were passed around and held by multiple individuals rather than just mom sitting at home on the couch by herself all day long. That's not how we were meant to parent, and yet it's how many of us are parenting today. And that doesn't mean that that individual is bad, broken, wrong, not a good mom. It means the system isn't working. It's not supporting us in the way that we actually need it to.
And do you think that not having the language to
Mhm.
describe what we're going through as well contributes to that sort of feeling of incompetence or like completely at sea?
Yeah. I think it's the lack of language. Most of us don't run across the word matrescence until
No.
maybe we've been through one or several pregnancies and babies. Um, we don't know that this is a transition very similar. It sounds like it because it's very similar to adolescence. What happens in our adolescence?
Hmm.
We go through physical changes, hormonal changes, identity changes, relationship changes. Our world kind of turns upside down for a while.
Yeah.
And we have so much empathy for
Yeah.
teenagers. We're like, oh, this is a really hard time. You're going through so much is changing. We don't have that empathy for moms. We're like, oh, aren't you happy? Isn't this the best time of your life?
Hmm.
Isn't everything great? You
Yeah.
have a healthy baby. When actually it's so much more complicated than that. There's so many other layers. And so not only do we not have the language, it doesn't feel like there's a lot of room to talk about that.
Yeah.
Even, people who are really have positive intention. It might be our partner, it might be our mother, it might be our mother-in-law, it might be our GP. We go and we say, I'm not enjoying this. I'm struggling. This is harder than I expected it to be. And we get those placating responses of, oh, yeah, being mom's hard. Or you just need to get some sleep. Sleep when the baby sleeps,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
terrible advice.
So bad. It's
Do
so bad.
not work for anyone.
No.
And so there's this sense, because we're not talking about it, because we're not acknowledging that just like adolescence, matrescence is clunky. It's challenging. It's messy. It's exciting. It's thrilling. It's exhilarating. It's hard. It's exhausting. It's draining. It's, it turns our world upside down because we're not
Yeah.
saying that. Individuals assume it must be me. I must be
Yeah.
bad, broken, wrong. I'm the only one that's struggling. So they don't share it. They go to the moms group and they say, yep, baby slept a little bit better last night. Or, oh, I just love my baby so much. I feel like we have to, before we say anything bad or anything negative, we have to preface it with, I
Hmm.
just really love my baby, but goodness, I mean, the sleep deprivation is kind of hard. Or
Yeah.
I love being a mom. It's so fabulous. But like breastfeeding was maybe a bit more challenging than I expected. We have to preface it to
Yeah.
prove that we like mothering or that we are enjoying it instead of just acknowledging like this is hard. Of course, motherhood is wonderful, but it's also really hard.
Really hard. Yeah. And it's okay to say that it's hard and that you're having a hard time. And
Yeah.
it's also okay to tell people that no, my baby's not sleeping. But it's not something I'm doing wrong. I'm not broken. My baby's not broken. Babies just don't sleep. They just don't sleep.
Stones. And I mean, when we, another layer of this matrescence piece, when we find out that we are pregnant, although we're imagining a baby, like this is happening in our body. They're like
Mhm.
inextricably linked to us. They are
Yeah.
part of us.
Mhm.
They are really connected. And all the way through pregnancy, even though we start to, as we can feel baby move and we see those kicks and, we're really starting to feel that that bowling ball feeling, we start to imagine baby out of the womb, that baby still feels very much part of us. And
Yeah.
even after baby is born, they often, they still feel like an extension of us. They are part of us. And it takes a little while and often an external reminder that that little person is their own unique little person. They are, we cannot make them sleep, make them eat well, do all of these things. We actually, as parents, have a lot less control over some of those things than we think
Yeah.
we do.
Mhm.
But the natural assumption, because this little person was literally part of my body for 9 months, it is my responsibility to make sure that they are sleeping well, they are eating well, we take this real inherent responsibility. And that gets reinforced by society. Society tells us, like, oh, well, if you just, if
Yeah.
you should, you should, have you tried? I can promise you, any mom who has any baby who's not sleeping or not eating has tried everything. They've
Everything.
Googled everything. They know
Yep.
all of the tips and tricks.
Mhm.
They don't need the shoulds. We don't need
No.
to should on our moms because that's really
No.
what it feels like.
Yeah. And I just want to go back to the maternal mental health piece and the intersection of matrescence and maternal mental health.
Yeah.
Um, what happens in that space? Is the transition linked to mental health difficulties? Does it explain any of them, or am I completely wrong there?
Absolutely. A great question. So let's dig into the nuance here. First and foremost, all moms, and we've really broadened that category to include everyone who is experiencing any element of this
Mhm.
transition to parenthood. But the like all 100% of them are experiencing matrescence. So whether we're experiencing mental health challenges as part of our journey or not, all of us are experiencing matrescence. And so even for my clients who I'm working with who have the mental health challenge layer added in, we're still talking about matrescence stuff. We're
Yeah.
still talking about, how do the baby won't eat or what kind of mother am I? Like, we have to be doing that. The connection here is that some of the pieces that show up in matrescence can be what we call risk factors or increase our vulnerability for developing what we call perinatal mood and anxiety disorders, which are just a fancy word for saying our mental health might experience a little bit of a wobble in that transition to parenthood. And we do know, because there are some of those vulnerabilities during this time, yeah, our risk for having a little bit of a mental health wobble during this time is a bit higher. We do see about 20% of moms experience some sort of mental health challenge in that transition. So it's actually not a unique experience. There's a really wide range of ways that can show up. Um, and our matrescence pieces might be something that is part of that. So maybe it's sleep deprivation. I like to say that sleep deprivation is remember that it's used as a form of torture.
Form of
Like
torture. Yeah.
it is, it feels hard because it is hard. And
Mhm.
so maybe part of our matrescence journey is baby's not sleeping. We're not sleeping. We know that not sleeping increases our vulnerability for having some of those mental health challenges.
Yeah.
We also know some of the hormonal pieces that I talked about earlier also increase that risk. Maybe it's some of our tender spots coming out. Maybe it's things like past trauma, or maybe it's pieces with our relationship with our own mother that come up in that identity piece. Maybe it's the lack of community. One of the biggest protective factors on reducing our risk of having that mental health wobble is actually community. That's
Mm.
support. Having the really rich, robust village around us is so protective. Someone to mind the baby while we sleep rather than sleeping when the baby sleeps. Someone to check in with us and say, hey, how is this transition going? How are you finding it? What's hard about this? Someone to just make sure that we're eating. Like, food and water, especially in those early days, can feel like they just go out the window. I think there should be, next to anywhere that mom is feeding baby, there should be a snack caddy where single handheld snacks, water bottles, and it should be somebody else's job to stock that.
Yeah.
Rather than it being on mom, part
Hmm.
of being part of the village is feeding mom, especially if she's feeding or caring for baby. When we do these things, when we understand the matrescence process, when we understand that moms and families need support in that process, we can mitigate a lot of the risk here. You talked about language and being able to know. You also know that knowing all of the things we've talked about today, like, oh, it's actually really normal for it to feel clunky. It's normal to occasionally find myself crying in the closet because this is
Yeah.
really hard. Oh, I'm not broken. I'm not,
Yeah.
I'm not unwell. I'm just navigating the transition to parenthood. When we're looking at how do we know we've stepped into, oh, I might need a little bit more support. Maybe I need another person in my village or community who has the tools to help me navigate how I'm feeling in all of this. One, sleep is a big indicator. If the baby's sleeping and you can't sleep, so you have opportunity to sleep and you can't sleep. Your mind is racing, your body
Yeah.
is racing. You feel like no matter what I do, I can't actually get the rest I need. That's a great reason because I want you sleeping. That's really important. Two, if you're not enjoying this, now that doesn't mean that every moment of motherhood should be like rainbows and butterflies and sunshine. But if it feels hard to connect to, yeah, sometimes it's really hard, but like overall, I'm feeling like this is a good thing or I'm enjoying this. That doesn't have anything to do with loving your baby. Moms will love their babies. It's the, am I getting that lovely experience that I wanted out of this? It's a great reason to come in. Also, if you can't turn your brain off, worst case scenarios, if you're having thoughts that are scaring you, which is actually a really common thing that shows up in motherhood, we have what's
Yeah.
called intrusive thoughts that, oh, this awful thought pops into my head. It's terrifying. It's distressing. If it just, whew, okay, that was a scary thought, and it goes away, not problematic. If it's sticky, check in with someone. Or if anything just seems not right, you feel low, you don't feel yourself. These are all great reasons to come in and chat with somebody.
I suppose it's just around normalizing that, you know, these thoughts can crop up and there's nothing wrong with you as a mom if that happens.
Yeah, I think this is so, so important. When we poll moms, we find 90 to 95% of moms say that they experience intrusive thoughts at some point during their pregnancy or postnatal period. So that's a lot. That's the vast majority of us. And these are just that like bubble up out of nowhere, almost like, oh, where did that come from? Kind of scary thought. And this type of thought is, I call it the overactivation of our mama bear. So our mama bear is that protective part of our brain. It's absolutely there to keep baby safe. It's scanning for threats. It's scanning for danger. It is, it's on point to make sure that baby is safe. Sometimes that part of our brain gets a little overactivated and sends us these like what ifs thoughts. If we can see that thought of like, oh, that's a scary thought. There's my mama bear. And we can say, "Ooh, okay, yep, nope, the buggy's wheel locks are on, I'm totally safe here at home. Of course, that's not going to happen. We can reassure ourselves and we feel better. That is a incredibly normal mom moment. A lot of the distress actually comes from the fear of like, what does having that thought say about me as mom? Or that I've thought that sometimes the thoughts can be quite scary and
Yeah.
even sometimes can include things of us hurting our baby, which are very
Mhm.
scary thoughts. Again, if we feel that like, oh, that's a terrible thought, but that's a mama bear thought, that's not going to happen and we can settle. And it happens occasionally. That's well within normal. Where we want to take a little bit deeper of a look is if they're like persistent or consistent, they're coming up all the time, or if they're sticky. So we have the thought, and instead of being able to go, oh, that's a scary mama bear thought, but that's not going to happen and we're okay. If I feel like that I'm very scared that that's going to happen and I feel like I have to take action or I have to do something or I have to worry about it in order to make sure that it's not going to happen. There's actually a lot we can do with that. It's not a sign of mom not being able or of mom being any danger to baby. Just I'm going to say that because some moms worry about
Yeah.
that. Instead, it's like a hyper overactivation of that mama bear part of our brain. There's so much we can do to turn it down. You don't have to live with those sticky, tricky thoughts.
And I'm really conscious of how we live today.
Mm.
And you
Yes,
mentioned it
how we live now.
yourself that we live very far away from families, friends, and that when we talk about village, a lot of women are like, where's the village?
Yeah.
Who's in my village? Who do I want in my village?
So,
So for women who I suppose are feeling like they have nobody in their village, but feeling like they should. And
yeah.
again, there's the word should. And I don't want
Mhm.
anybody to feel like that. But if they need a bit of support, what are the things that you might work through with people to say, make it a little bit smoother for themselves?
Yes. Um, and I find today our village, our community, the reality of it looks way different than it might
Hmm.
have looked for our own mothers, that we might have expected it to look. Um, if at all possible before baby arrives, but we can definitely do this once baby arrives. I like to actually build out a support directory. So this is a list of who. Now, the who, you're spot on. We want to decide who's in our community, who's in
Yeah.
our village. Not, there's no shoulds in ours. If our, we feel like our sister should, because she's my sister, she should be part of the, community I pull on. But, oh, I've got a really dicey relationship with my sister and I'm going to feel quite vulnerable afterwards. And I don't know if I have the capacity for that.
Yeah.
Fine. Great. You get to choose. So the who is friends and family members, people, peer supporters. Maybe they are people we met in the antenatal group. Maybe they're the people we met in the moms group. Maybe they're the neighbor who walks around with the buggy,
Yeah.
who. The reality is in our modern world, professionals are playing a bigger and bigger role in our community and village. So it might be a doula, it might be a lactation consultant, it might be our actual consultant or GP, it might be the um, you know friends of breastfeeding peer supporter that I've connected with. There are so many lovely resources, and we want to put them all on there. The next column is the what column. What can that person and or group provide for me? There's a lot of pain when we expect somebody to be able to provide something for us, and that's not the thing they can actually provide for us.
Yeah.
A very basic example of this is, oh, I expect my mom to like bring me meals, but she's a terrible cook. and maybe those aren't actually the meals I want. But she's really good at just like sitting with me and holding me with when I cry. Like that's what I so I'm gonna put that. I'm not gonna put meals on that. But my best friend is like a professional chef and like she might be the person that I ask to help feed me. because
Mhm.
that's something I know she can provide or whatever that is. So we put really clearly what is the actual pieces that that person can provide for us. Then I stick the contact information on there. The reason for this is then I, as mom, I'm not the only person who can access that.
Yeah.
Let's stick it on the fridge, and dad or partner or my mother, or maybe it's the doula that's there and can call and set something up. That information is available to everyone. There's something about having it tangibly written on a piece of paper that helps with the permission. Oh, I've actually thought through this person can provide this thing. I might ask them, hey, would it be okay if I call on you for this? And they're like, yes, please let me do that. It makes it easier to actually make that call when we need the support.
Yeah. Yeah. Just finally, if you were to describe matrescence to a woman who's just become a mother, um, what would you want her to know?
Mm. A beautiful question. So I would start by just kind of acknowledging, like, wow, you have entered an incredible journey. This is not a one stop point in time. This is not a once the baby arrives, you are mom. You are already on this journey. This journey started long before you got that positive pregnancy test. And the thing with journeys is that when we're in the middle, sometimes that's the clunkiest part.
Mm,
When we read a novel, the middle of the novel, that's when all the drama and the, character building is happening and they're going through hard things. You're in the middle of the journey. So, of course, it feels hard. Of course, it feels clunky. Who is on your team? Who is navigating this journey with you so that you can get through the clunky, through the hard, and get to that lovely end of the story, to that lovely conclusion? Because it's really hard right now. It don't always feel this hard. But while it's hard, let's get you the support that you need.
That's all for this week. If you'd like more information around supports for perinatal mental health, you can contact Rebecca at Mindful Roots Counselling. I've also left a link with this podcast to other supports available. As always, if these conversations are resonating with you and you'd like more coaching-led support, come and join the Women's Collective by BU Coaching, a coaching community where you can thrive in all seasons of life.